The career pause that quietly paid off. From the outside, it looked like hesitation, a break that didn't make sense in a culture that rewards constant motion, a pause few people felt comfortable explaining. Careers are expected to move forward without interruption. Gaps raise questions. Momentum is prized. In today's professional world, slowing down is often framed as falling behind. But sometimes, stepping away becomes the most strategic move a person can make. The culture of perpetual motion creates a powerful pressure to equate movement with progress, to treat any stillness as a signal of difficulty rather than intention. He had internalized that pressure, which is partly why the pause, when he finally allowed it, felt so disorienting and so necessary at the same time. To understand why this career pause mattered, we need to look at what came before it. He was progressing steadily, roles stacked logically, experience accumulated. Nothing was broken, nothing demanded escape, and that made the decision harder to justify. There was no obvious reason to stop, no crisis demanding a reset, no failure requiring a recovery. The pause wasn't being forced on him. He had to choose it against a perfectly functional trajectory, which is a harder choice than pausing in the wake of something that has already gone wrong. The pause wasn't planned as reinvention. There was no dramatic burnout, no forced exit, just a growing awareness that forward motion had become automatic. Goals were inherited. Decisions were efficient but unexamined. He was moving fast without questioning direction. The efficiency of his progression had become its own kind of blind spot. He was good at moving. He had never stopped to ask where the motion was actually taking him, or whether, if he chose freely, it was a direction he would choose again. Stopping felt risky. Momentum, once lost, is hard to regain. Peers were advancing. Opportunities were visible. Pausing meant watching others move ahead while he stayed still. It meant confronting silence instead of progress. Professional culture doesn't have neutral language for pausing. Gaps are explained. Breaks are justified. The burden of proof falls on the person who stops, not on the system that expects constant motion. But beneath the anxiety, something felt necessary. He realized that continuing without reflection would be easier than stopping, but far more costly long-term, because speed without intention eventually locks you into paths you never consciously chose. The lock-in happens gradually. Skills specialize in a particular direction. Identity forms around a particular role. And at some point, the cost of changing direction exceeds what most people are willing to pay. He saw that horizon approaching. The pause was a way of choosing before the choice became unavailable. And so, quietly, without announcement, he paused. Not to escape work, but to understand what kind of work was worth returning to. The first days felt lighter than expected, then heavier. Without deadlines, time stretched. Mornings lost urgency. The structure that once guided his weeks disappeared overnight. At first, the freedom felt earned. Then it felt disorienting. Progress was no longer measured by output. Value was no longer obvious. He had spent years in environments where his worth was legible, in deliverables, in timelines, in the responses of people who depended on his work. Now, legibility was gone. He had to find some other way of knowing whether he was doing something meaningful. That search proved harder than he expected. Questions followed quickly. How long is too long? What story would this pause tell later? Would momentum ever return? The absence of answers made the pause feel risky in a way work never had. Work had risk too, the risk of failure, of misalignment, of choosing wrong. But those risks were familiar. They came inside a structure that provided feedback and context. People reacted carefully. Some admired the courage. Others offered thinly veiled concern. Conversations shifted. He noticed how often careers are discussed as trajectories, not experiences. Pausing disrupted that narrative, and discomfort filled the gap. He was no longer inside a story others recognized, which meant they couldn't locate him on the map they used to make sense of professional lives. Internally, the conflict sharpened. Without external pressure, self-examination intensified. He confronted assumptions he had carried unquestioned about success, about ambition, about what he was optimizing for. And some of those assumptions didn't hold up under stillness. They had been functional when he was moving, efficient enough to guide decisions without requiring close inspection. Stillness removed the excuse of motion. He explored slowly, read without urgency, learned without deliverables, took conversations that weren't transactional, interests resurfaced that had been postponed for years. Not all of them led anywhere, but each revealed something about what had been missing. He began to understand the shape of his own engagement, what drew it fully forward, and what merely claimed it while leaving part of him elsewhere. That understanding was not something a performance review could have produced. The pause stripped away noise. Without constant motion, he could finally hear which parts of his work energized him and which simply kept him busy. The distinction had been blurred by speed. Now it was impossible to ignore. He discovered that several things he had categorized as motivating were actually just habitual. He did them efficiently. He received recognition for them. Still, doubt lingered, because reflection feels productive only in hindsight. And in the middle of it, stillness can feel indistinguishable from stagnation. The question remained unanswered. Would this pause become a detour, or the foundation for something far more deliberate? The real work of the pause didn't look like progress. It looked like discomfort. As weeks passed, the novelty faded. Stillness lost its calm edge and revealed something sharper. Without the distraction of momentum, unresolved questions surfaced. Doubts he had postponed with productivity now demanded attention, and there was nowhere to redirect them. He had always been good at redirecting. His professional life had been, in some ways, a refined practice of staying busy enough that the harder questions couldn't find him. The pause ended that practice. This was a conflict he hadn't anticipated. Pausing removed external pressure, but it intensified internal responsibility. He could no longer blame systems, roles, or timelines for misalignment. The only variable left was choice, and that made every thought heavier. Reflection stopped being optional. It became unavoidable. He began mapping patterns instead of resumes. Not what he had done, but why he had done it. Which environments brought out clarity, which ones drained curiosity, which successes felt meaningful, and which simply looked impressive. The answers didn't arrive cleanly. They contradicted old narratives. He had told himself certain stories about what he valued, and the evidence of his own experience didn't always confirm those stories. There were moments he considered returning early, not because clarity had arrived, but because uncertainty was exhausting. Movement would have been easier, any movement, but returning without insight would have defeated the purpose of stopping in the first place. He understood this clearly enough to stay, not comfortably, not without cost. Slowly, something shifted. Connections formed between experiences that once felt unrelated. Skills he underestimated revealed deeper value. Interests he had dismissed as impractical aligned into something coherent, not a role, but a direction, one shaped by intention instead of inertia. The direction didn't arrive fully formed. It assembled itself piece by piece from everything he had been examining. The pause wasn't producing outcomes yet, but it was producing understanding. And that understanding began changing how he evaluated opportunity itself. He no longer asked what would move him forward fastest. He asked what would be worth committing to for years. That question altered everything. Because once you define direction clearly, momentum becomes a tool instead of a trap. And for the first time, he felt ready to move again, not out of habit, but with purpose. The return didn't feel like a restart. It felt like alignment. When he stepped back into work, it wasn't with urgency. It was with selectivity. He evaluated opportunities differently now, not by speed or status, but by fit. The pause had sharpened his criteria. What once looked appealing now felt misaligned. What once felt risky now felt intentional. He passed on things he would previously have accepted automatically. He pursued things he would previously have dismissed as insufficiently prestigious. The career pause didn't erase momentum. It redirected it. He moved forward with clarity that constant motion had never allowed. Decisions felt grounded. Commitments felt deliberate. And the confidence he carried didn't come from certainty. It came from having questioned his direction thoroughly. He knew why he was moving. He knew what he was moving toward. Looking back, the pause didn't pay off immediately. It paid off quietly. through better choices, through fewer regrets, through a career shaped by understanding instead of urgency. The time away became an investment that compounded over years, not as a line on a resume, but as a shift in the quality of every decision that followed. The pause was invisible on paper. In a world that celebrates speed, stillness is underrated. But those who pause with intention often return stronger. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The career